Now, after seeing the title of the session, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands unless you feel comfortable. When you see a title like this, or an op-ed that makes a statement about white supremacy in financial education, who feels a prick in their gut by that? Who feels defensive to say, I'm not a supremacist, I'm not a racist, I'm trying to create opportunity? Instead of possibly considering, listening, and believing 44 million Americans who say this to us. This is one of the things we're considering. And what we want to do is make FinEd work for all. And Emil will get into this more, but what I want as CEO of NEFE is to help our work, and when I say our, I mean all of us that are in this room, all of us who work in this space, to understand the limits and benefits of financial education, of advocacy, access, policy change. When you consider, generations of the inability to build wealth and what that means. Jennifer showed it this morning. You saw the data. The data are clear on this. We can't deny it. And what we are trying to do is remove as much as possible the presence in our community and in financial education of, learn how to budget, learn how to manage debt, learn how to manage your credit, and then you'll be fine. And these things won't matter anymore. When the folks who are largely saying this are the ones who have benefited from many generations of a system that is designed to do, as Jennifer said this morning, exactly what it is doing. So we're not saying you are a white supremacist by doing financial education. We're not saying you are a racist. What we're saying is that those tenets are present in our industry, and what we want to do is shed light on that and remove them, and understand our own bias, and even understand our own role and how we've even perpetuated those things over the years, and how can we make change. And I would encourage all of you, if you, at some point today or soon, read the op-eds that have been written by Chloe McKenzie. I told her, and I understand, my experience is my experience, and one of a vast privilege. I have rarely, if ever, felt more heard and seen in writing in our space than I have this year. And in particular, what it meant to have financial trauma and what that means in financial education. When I first came to NEFE, I would go to lots of trainings and teacher PDs, and I always felt horrible when I would leave those because of all the things that I did wrong, and the mistakes that I made, and the shame that we sort of impose on those. So what we want to do is remove those things from our space, or at least shed light on them and start to advocate the chipping away, blasting away at those. And I love the illustration of the obstacles, because we talk a lot about obstacles in the path. And that's why we do this. We're not accusing individuals, we're saying it's here, it's present. And to not acknowledge it is perpetuating that. And so I just want to facilitate a discussion about what that means, and you're going to hear from a person who lives this work and is doing amazing things and works with Chloe. And I'm sorry that it's not you and Chloe here. I'm sorry you're stuck with me. But in Washington, what do you think about all this? Where we are.
Thank you, and on behalf of Chloe, thank you for the work that you all are doing. I spoke with her last night, and she sends her regards. We definitely have been doing this work, and when we got in connection with NEFE, it was actually a breath of fresh air, honestly. And I say that in all sincerity because there are a lot of organizations, companies, people who say that they want to do the work and move the ball, but they're not putting anything behind it. Whether that's the adequate resources, whether that's when you bring in an outside expert, letting them show why they're an expert, right? Like we still sometimes want to place our finger on it to make sure it has what we believe needs to be seen versus what is the actual truth, right? Especially through the lens of those who have suffered. And I always love to start with that video, and it's a little long, but I wanted to make sure that we had enough time to converse and have a dialogue. But it's meant to show those who are always so willing to push back and say that we've come so far or it wasn't rooted, and it's like, these are facts. None of this is made up. Like, you can research this and see the institutional and the structural changes that were put in place. And so we, over at Black Film and at 10-7, are very intentional about words and language, right? And so we're adamant about never saying financial literacy, right? It's financial education, or it's, for our space, it's wealth justice. And it's because financial literacy, and when you're thinking about the word literacy, it creates a space as if people don't know, right? And I wanted to read this definition, right? And so it says financial literacy is the ability to understand and effectively use various financial skills, including personal financial management, budgeting, and investing. The meaning of financial literacy is the foundation of your relationship with money, and it is a lifelong journey of learning. And if you've ever been broke, or know people who have been broke, who are living paycheck to paycheck, and are not homeless, they understand how to budget, right? They understand how to have a relationship with money. They just don't have the access to it, right? And so we can't come at it from a space of, and that's why we say it's rooted in white supremacy, right? We know better, so we need to show you better, as opposed to, we created something and we need to change this. And so I look forward to this conversation as we talk about financial trauma, financial abuse, financial shame, some of the things that you mentioned, and some of the terms that Chloe has coined, and how it has shown up, but also like, what can we do, and what are some of the steps to take forward? Because this is not about a blame game, right? Like, we're in a space where people actually want to do better, they want to show up. So what does that look like, and how can we make some of those changes?
Yeah. For me, one of the biggest things, in the chair, I sit in a NEFE, is to understand how do we, improve our work directly as an organization, but how do we advocate for an improved dialogue, improved community. And none of us are saying that helping people understand how to get the most out of their money, or how to sort of navigate practices, or how to avoid certain kinds of products, but how do you actually help a person make a decision or have access to the right information that is aligned to their own values and their own goals and what they want to achieve for their life, instead of imposing upon sort of this template of what historically has been sort of, quote, financial planning, and then helping someone understand that, because information and knowledge is powerful. But you can be a CFP, you can take all the classes, but if you don't have the opportunity, if you don't have access to the same career pathways, if you will, then what does it mean? And so for us, it means, is financial education getting its true impact if you have the information and the knowledge and the skills and all the things that go along with sort of living your financial, or managing your financial life, without the opportunity to truly apply those things. And what does that mean for your career advancement? And I have benefited from information and knowledge and access personally, but I also know that there are far fewer obstacles that I had to overcome to get there. And I want that for everyone. I want everyone to be able to have that choice. And so we're saying, how do we do that? How do we advocate for that inner space? Because it's not just knowledge gain. It's helping our peers and our friends in the community understand that knowledge alone isn't going to create that. And that's why I get so frustrated with the whole avocado toast and coffee bullshit. It drives me nuts. And I say that because, you know, yes, you can sort of spend differently and trim and have a little extra money for this and that. But coffee is not going to make you poor. You know, and just stop that and understand why there's poverty. You know, and when you think about history, you know, entire race, entire generations, multiple generations are still poor. And there's so much rooted in the legacy of our industry that just blames instead of tries to understand, and letting education be a component of what it means to overcome or grow or build that generational wealth. And we are trying to break that cycle of discussion that it's just about knowledge gain. Education and access to information is important, but that will not defeat poverty. Jennifer said it, and you all say this constantly.
Yeah, it's that but part, right?
Yes.
And we have to understand access is key. And I know, so my major was history with a minor in African American studies at Louisiana State University. Go Tigers. And so I understand the historical complex or concept, right? And I understand also that this country, how it's made its money, it's founded off of violence. And we don't want to talk about that, right? And if you look at like how people have created wealth, amassed wealth, and maintained wealth, violence is the trend. And so it's the but, right? Like we can have the educational conversation all the time, and having that assumes that people are dumb. Sometimes that's true, but for the most part, people can amass and understand. But so let's remove the history, right? Let's look at present day and how it shows up, and the conversations that could be had but are not being had, right? And so we take cryptocurrency, and it's skyrocketed. And those who have made their money early on have done well. But when it's trickled down, we now want to regulate it. We now want to figure out ways to make sure that other people can't. But the conversation that's not being had is, this is a way that those who have not had access to Wall Street have been able to make investments and make money fast, right? And so typically, if you wanted to invest, you have to go to a trader and have $25,000. Most people don't have that as disposable income, right? But with what happened, was it the beginning of last year with GameStop? That changed the landscape. And the white supremacy or the structural space that came in was, people who don't look like us are winning, we have to shut it down. Which is why Robinhood stopped trading, which is illegal, right? You're losing, you're playing the game, but you're losing, so I need to change the rules. And we're not talking about how that was going to be a way, or how that has actually equaled and leveled the playing field. And I'm not up here advocating for crypto, but what I'm saying is that there have been opportunities and ways for people to actually amass wealth, but when they do so, they change the rules to ensure that those who were winning can continue to win. And that's the conversation that has to be had. It's after we do the education, what are we doing? What are those steps that are being taken, right? And as an organization such as yourself, how are you showing up in those conversations to make sure that we're having those tough discussions, right? Okay, so we had 2020 and the summer uprising, and all of these companies were shocked that racism exists, right? Who knew? And so we had pledges of billions of dollars from corporations, but how much has actually been dispersed? How much has actually touched the hands of those who are trying to make changes in their community? Or was it just a facade and a ploy, right? Like, this was good PR, but we don't actually have to do the disbursement, right? Like, those are the things that we're talking about when we're trying to advance and figure out how do we structurally, because education can only go so far when we're talking about financial education and the actual breaking down of barriers. But if there's no money, or if there's no way to amass money, if we're not raising minimum wage, if we're not looking at how people are, paying taxes, right? Like, I don't have a problem with people avoiding paying taxes, but make that a way for everybody, right? Like, not just for those who understand the tax code. I'm gonna use it different. I have no problem with Mitt Romney not paying and understanding the system. The problem that I have is with the actual system. And we don't want to talk about that and changing the code to ensure that those who are making the least are not paying the most, right? Those are the conversations, those are the systems, and that's where this community can come in and be advocates, right? Like, and so we talk a lot about being an ally and an advocate. Those are not the same words, and they should never be used as synonyms, right? An ally is one who pats you on the back, good job. An advocate is one who gets their hands dirty, right? We need people who are actually getting their hands dirty, who are willing to risk some of their funding from, their backers, because they're going against the grain to ensure that equity shows up in the space.
Well, something I've had a few aha moments over the last several months, and one of them is we were having a discussion with staff. We were in a retreat, and we were working on some equity and inclusion strategy, thinking about the future of NEFE, and our board has done the same thing, and it's really cool that the board and the staff all ended up in the same space separately, and so it just confirms that it's the right direction. But in that conversation, and this firm that we're using to help facilitate a lot of this work, they're based in Cleveland, and one of the partners is a long history of corporate HR, and very frank, matter-of-fact person. And she's just part of our team now, really. And we were having this discussion about the politicized environment around even just the word equity. And she said, don't let that be a politicized word. It's about human dignity and rights and doing the right thing. Instead of it being a conservative or a liberal discussion, that is, don't be distracted by that. Don't let that shift you. Don't let the political environment of what these words appear to mean, and face it and define it for what that means for NEFE. And that was a powerful discussion for me to have with our staff. It's just in our little breakout group, because it's been hijacked. Mm-hmm. Equity, inclusion, diversity, representation, those words have been hijacked largely to mean something like, oh, well, you're going to take something I had, or instead of it just being, let's create opportunity and let's understand what that means. And for me, that is about shedding light. And so the other aha moment I had was in one of the pieces that Chloe wrote and we pushed out through NEFE circles is, we did that big survey in the spring that said 88% of Americans think every teen should have a financial education required, at least semester class. And Chloe said, why is it not 100? So she talked to, and it was largely younger people, lower income people, and people of color who did not say yes to that. And so she did some focus groups and asked, why is this? I mean, she knew the answer, I think, already, but she wanted to sort of go through that, from her own experience. And in full disclosure, Chloe was like corporate banker. Right?
Yeah, she worked on Wall Street.
Yes.
she traded mortgages, and so, you know, when you would swap and trade and move it over so it could be more profitable and all of that stuff, she made her blood money, as you know, she might coin it. And so she's not coming from a space of one who struggled and attained, now let me get back. She actually comes from money, right? She grew up in Prince George County, Maryland, which is one of the wealthiest counties for African Americans in the country. Like, has sustained, and it's still one of the and so it's not something like, I think when we hear these and we have these conversations, it's all about the one that made it out, so he wants to give back, and it's like, that's not necessarily the case. And we have to remove those stigmas, right? Like when we're talking about equity, right? And how that looks and what it shows up as, right? And it's so interesting because Louisiana ranks at the bottom. I mean, I think we still say thank God for Mississippi and you know.
That's what we say in Kentucky too.
Right.
West Virginia.
I don't know if this is still a part of the curriculum, but in high school, in order for me to graduate, I had to pass civics and free enterprise. Those were two required courses in Louisiana state education. And one, civics, thinking about the landscape now, that's just, but free enterprise was a required course. I mean, you had to pass that, you had to learn about budgeting, but also just like micro, you had to understand the relationship and all of that, and it's being taken out. And the question then begs is why, right? Why is this access to understanding how to move the needle forward being removed? What are we talking about, right? Like, and then you revert back to how we used to say that home ownership was the path to wealth, right? Like, I fundamentally disagree with that because one, not everybody can have home ownership. Two, when you buy a house, you no longer have liquid assets. If something happens, what do? How do you have now a large mortgage, right? And so the pathway is not there. Also, the rules have changed, right? So like, you can go into your house and then next week they devalue your house. But then, separate and apart from that, the fact that we have created an educational system where your value of your house is tied to how much you pay in taxes to your Board of Education directly correlates to what is being taught and why people are not advancing. It's line. It's linear. It's not parallel, like it's one straight line. And we're not talking about that and how that has changed. And you know, I don't want to get too much into it, but like charter schools is a part of that process. And there may be people in here who are advocates for it, but charter schools are taking away from the resources that are there from public schools. So you're changing the dynamics of how people are taught. And even when we're talking about education is the key, if the education is not equal or equitable across the board, it's not a key. You're just creating another mass workforce to continue to perpetuate the cycles that have been there. And that's where we're like, okay, what can we do, right? Like, what are those small incremental changes? Nothing is going to happen overnight, right? Like, even if California and Gavin Newsom is able to pass his bill and get reparations to all of those descendants, they will find another way to change the rules. And so we have to look at who's making the rules and how are they changing the rules in order to make sure that the playing field continues. Because I can give somebody $2 million, but if I devalue $2 million, then what are we talking about, right? Like if I raise the price of milk, if I raise the price of gas, if I raise the price of this, what I've just given you does not have the same intrinsic value that it had the day before. So I've not necessarily created an equal playing field and made sure that you are set up for success. Right? And so,
or say you can't use it for this and that and that. You can only use it for, you know, it's again an oppressive control. even in the guise of.
And that's, it's like, it's exhausting,
Yes.
right? Because you're trying to figure out how to help those who look like you, and that's family and friends, right, as well. While also understanding that you have to go to structures and systems that don't want to bend. They don't want, they like the game. Like they like the system is not broken. It was built this way to work this way, and it is a very, very successful system. As Ryan pointed out last night, when you're talking about even like the prison industrial complex and criminal justice or unjust system that is, and you're looking at jailing someone for $200 because they were hungry, that's going to cost them money that they will never be able to get back. And then once they get out, they're going to still have to pay back the $200 because they have restitution, right? And versus, how do we get here? What are the things that are, needed? Like food insecurity and food deserts are a real thing that relates directly to the crimes that happen in urban and inner cities, right? Like, but we're not having this conversation. We're just saying, oh, they need to get better jobs. Where? How? How can you get a better
just
job?
Move. Like it's so simple. Yes.
Right? Like, I need to move. I live in New York. And the article came out earlier this week or last week on the 10 most expensive places in the world.
I saw that.
It was tied with, I believe it was Singapore, tied for number 1, right? So you think about the changes that are being put in place, and when we hear words like white supremacy, or we hear the policies, we immediately think that this is liberal versus progressive or conservative and all of that, and not understanding it's all one system, right? Like even in the liberal city of New York, the mayor has made it a policy to institutionalize mentally ill people, right? That's another cost that's going to be put on the burden of taxpayers versus figuring out maybe we take some of the money from the police force and actually put it into social services so that we can not have to jail people because they're having an episode. Mental health is real, right? And there's a financial cost to that. Like, it all ties in. And so at what point do we actually want to move the ball forward? Or at what point do we want to just say, these are some good policies, this was some good research, we know what we need to do, and it's up to those who are suffering to get off their behinds and do it, right? The old adage of those closest to the problem are closest to the solution is trash. Because the onus is placed on those who are suffering when those closest to the problem are the ones who created the problem. So they're also closest to the solution. And let's put the burden on them to actually make some of the changes so that we can actually move the needle forward, as opposed to saying, well, you should do better, but we've not created a system for you to do better.
Well, I think, in terms of the practical, in terms of tomorrow, for those who work with students, for those who are advocating, for those who are asking for better data, one of the amazing things that came out of Chloe's research this year was she had this discussion with people who just, who experienced financial trauma, who experienced these things very vividly, and just didn't want anything to do with FEII because of what maybe that meant in that room or at that time, or who was teaching it, or their past experience with it. And one of the things that came out of this was maybe this should be a conversation we're having in our classrooms, in financial education, and saying, and she brought forward, well, what if I said to you as a financial education teacher, she was saying this to the young people, to college students, maybe you're not actually bad with money. Maybe that every single bank and credit union in the country spends hundreds of millions of dollars on software and purchase ordering and approval ordering so that they know which day you're going to be the lowest in your checking account. And then that's the day things get approved because they can maximize some of these banks. It's 40% of their profits on late fees, on overdraft fees. And when you're saying that to someone, that this is designed so that you will overdraft.
Right.
Especially if you're, paycheck to paycheck. You're living in a place like New York, or you're living in a place like Mississippi. You're managing sort of the day-to-day life, and life is expensive. And I've said this, and many of you have said this, that it is so expensive to be poor, and that's what Ryan was saying last night. And when we start to say this in the classroom, it's not just calculating this and make sure to negotiate that. It's saying that if you're at certain income levels, or if you're spending at certain levels, and your budget is flowing this way, know that there are hundreds of millions of dollars being made and invested on what order your purchases are approved.
Right.
And so, and she said, well, what if we said that was part of your experience in financial education, is actually learning that and understanding that? And the response was, yeah, that's not enough for that class. So let's start there.
Right. It's starting with the actual implementation of things,
Yeah.
right? What is being implemented? What has been implemented from all of the research, from all of the data? Like, what are we actually doing? And the process. How many of you all are familiar with debit resequencing? Yes. So that's what you're referring to. And so what it is banks legally are able to change the order of when they process the payments that you make, right? So like if you have $125 in your account and you spend $25, then you spend $75, right? Like you were good, but you made a purchase then for $100. They can take the $100 first and then take the $50, and that overdraws you, and then take everything else after and hit you up to 5 times a day, depending on the bank, for fees. So you've now paid an additional possibly $137 in fees, depending on how much they're charging in fees, on top of what you also just tried to spend, right? And so until we understand how the game actually works, we can't make changes to it, right? And so then it goes into the actual implementation of all of the knowledge, right? What does that look like, right? So when Black Femme was initially created to work with girls of color in actual schools. Of course, we work with all students, but the emphasis was on the girls of color, understanding that they had the biggest change agent and possibility to make changes in their community. We didn't want to just talk about from a theory standpoint, but we created partnerships to actually create accounts so that as they were getting good grades, they were rewarded and money was going in so that they could see. But if you're not putting anything tangible with the education, there is not, like, it's just words. It's literally just words, and it's good theory and good practices, and it continues to be something that kicks the can down the curve, right? And so as we move forward, it's what's the implementation? What can you go back to do in your day-to-day space, right? For NEFE, you all started with, when we did the actual looking at how you do your grants, right? We did an in-depth space of, is your application something that is oppressive, right? The questioning, are you too long, right? So like, for those who are funders, I challenge you to consider, how long is my application and how long is my grant process, right? If I am awarding $10,000 in grants, it should not take 3 months to process. That should be a 30-day turnaround, because obviously that organization needs that money. Now we're talking about millions of dollars, right? Like if you have a grant and you're giving out 500,000 and above, yes, you should do your due diligence. But it still should not take from March, which are opening, and then an actual releasing of funds in September and October. You are stunting the growth of the organizations that you are trying to help and benefit. And that's where the things, and so you all took that information and started making changes, right? Like, and so it's the actual implementation of how you're looking at the work that you're trying to impact. If you don't do that next step, then you're a part of the problem.
Right, right. Remember last night I said the unsexy word? That's what that means, right? So, we want to hear what you're thinking, what questions you have. And this is an ongoing discussion. We wanted to just talk to each other and just share what we're thinking about this, because the more of us in the space that are aware of these questions, these issues, then it starts to take root and change your practice and so forth. So what questions do you have? What comments? To each other? It doesn't have to just be to us.
Thank you. This is a necessary conversation. I totally agree. We often forget to talk about the issue of knowledge not equaling access. And I think we can all do better at finding pathways to combine the two. I loved the video. I just wanted to ask, do you have that online? And I'm curious to hear, if you do show it to audiences, what audiences you typically show it to. I think it's very effective.
So that's not our video. It's on YouTube, and so we can definitely make sure that that's shared out. We don't own the rights to any of that. And I like showing it to rooms that are predominantly like this, but then rooms that are people of color, because for the rooms it's people of color, it provides context and it removes some of the shame that comes with the positions that they've been placed in, right? And you have to understand exactly how we got here. And a lot of this is not taught. And as we're looking at how the changes to this country's educational system are taking place, it will continue to not be taught, right? And then in this room, or rooms like this, it's more to hammer down the point of, just because you are not a white supremacist does not mean you don't work in a system that was created and rooted in it. And so what are you doing to overcome and change it, right? And it's meant to be jarring. It's meant to create and evoke some type of emotion, because all of this is emotional. When you're trying to help somebody else, it requires emotions. It doesn't require sympathy, it requires empathy. You have to put yourself there and see exactly how to get through it. Sympathy just allows you to have a sense of, oh, I understand where you are. Empathy allows those changes to actually happen. And that's what we're trying to get across with that video in those type of rooms. I saw that one first, and then
I really appreciated you mentioned trying to help those who look like you, family and friends, and that this is something which is continually going on. And one of the things that I've experienced as a financial advisor, as a person preventing eviction in the social service space, and now as a researcher, is that we have this narrative of financial independence. And that's how the financial education is taught, from that narrative. But what is really happening is a financial interdependence. People are interdependent on each other to help make ends meet. Sometimes it's just to prevent the next eviction, and then I got to call in that favor 2 weeks later. So what would it look like then for financial education to operate from this narrative of financial interdependence?
that's a great question, right? And I think you first have to define in that space what that looks like. Is it from the sharing of the information, or the sharing of that access to the pools, right? I appreciate you acknowledging the interdependence, especially from the standpoint of, if I'm helping somebody out this month It's not because I have an access and abundance, it's